Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Sam Bass. I'm with the Market Intelligence team here at Open Minds. And today, as part of our weekly private roundtable series for elite members, we have Open Minds Senior Associate Ray Wolfe and Step-by-Step President and CEO Eric Lindy. And they will be discussing how to make strategy work with regards to mission, growth, and sustainability. But special thanks to our sponsor, Qualifax Incredible, for making today's session free and open. Normally, this session is a resource that is available only to our elite members. If you're interested in learning more about our membership packages, please feel free to reach out. And now to introduce our speakers. Ray Wolfe brings over 40 years of experience in the health and human services sector to Open Minds. His areas of expertise include managed care, value-based reimbursement models, financial analysis and management, mergers and acquisitions, CCBHC certification, integrated care, performance improvement, and strategic planning. And Eric Lindy, throughout his 30-year career in human services, has worked in a management capacity with county governments, support coordination, and provider organizations. He was the founder and CEO of the HAB Group before merging it with a larger nonprofit provider. Now, before we get started, I have two brief housekeeping reminders. First, while you are muted during today's briefing, we are open to any questions that you may have. Please feel free to submit those in the question box, and Eric and Ray will have time at the end to answer them. And secondly, the slides and recording from today's briefing will be available tomorrow on the Open Minds website. And with that, I will leave you with Eric and Ray.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it very much. I'm really interested in this topic today. It has felt to me over the last 3 years in working with Open Minds that one of the interesting aspects of the new normal is a willingness to take risks. Where previously I was working with clients and trying to make their strategic plans more strategic, or to convince people that they needed to do strategic planning. Now I feel somewhat an urgency about it. Strategic plans used to be either ignored or not worked with at all, or they were really not strategic plans. They were more like annual plans with a tuxedo on. It was very dressed up and very nice looking, but the goals were things like increasing capacity from 101 to 105, or improving a quality score from 85 to 90. It wasn't about strategy. It was about continuous quality improvement, and there's a huge difference between those two things. Strategy is really about repositioning. While we have an enormous amount of continuous quality improvement efforts going on, we have enormous needs to move away from that, where quality improvement is like trying to get closer to the bullseye with an arrow. Strategy is more like picking up the target and moving it somewhere else. It's finding new ways to do business, new positioning, new areas to be competitive. One of the things we've learned, I think, from this pandemic is that we are not essential to the community in the way we had hoped to be. And strategy is about, in my mind, trying to find ways to be that essential. So what I would like to see in that process moving forward is simply to get people more aggressive in terms of the strategies they build. Unfortunately, what business tells us about that approach is that it's fraught with dangers. When you look at what happens in business, and these are organizations of high quality, with big, expansive administrations and lots of talents in unique areas and capabilities that we as a sector don't have. When you look at that area, what you see is that for the most part, strategy efforts fail. 2 out of 3, frankly, do not succeed in the ways that the initial originators thought. So as we look at that, we have to wonder if that's the best that business can do. If that's the best that folks who have degrees and MBAs and who have talents and skills that we are without in our sector, how can we really be expected to make the big leaps into developing integrated care safety nets or innovating new models of care by working with hospital systems or creating new hybrid service lines that have demonstrable and verifiable methodologies for improving patient outcomes? It's really a concern about how that might work, and that is leading us to the next problem. So fortunately, we're in a place where we realize now that it is an imperative that we become essential to the communities we serve, and that we need a strategy to reposition what has previously been largely semi-governmental CMHCs that haven't varied a lot from the 1990s in terms of their standards or their approach to business at many levels, and to move in an era where we are competing against the strongest healthcare performers in America. So given that background, the good news is we've mentally made the shift and we're ready to do it. The bad news is we now face that cliff that every business faces, and that is that the strategy we now think will help us may not work as effectively as we want, may not be as implemented in the ways we like, and just in general may not improve the brand name of our company among our stakeholders and among the people we serve. So let's address that. I'm thinking about 4 items in an agenda for today.
Hey, Ray, sorry to interrupt here. I think we lost your screen.
Oh,
There we go. We got it. Thank you.
okay. Can you still see it?
Yes, sir.
Mhm.
Okay. Let's talk a bit about why failures occur, what kind of characteristics in a company kind of predispose it to having a failure in terms of a strategy. And then I want to talk to my good friend Eric about not necessarily old war stories, but about ideas and thoughts we have about how to motivate people in our market, how to organize for business efficiency and move ahead in new ways, and kind of have a discussion about that. In general, we're not going to be tremendously academic or share a lot of new data. What we want to do is create a dialogue around the pragmatics of the issues of strategy and to kind of move in that direction. After we've touched base on that, let's flip it. Let's look at the strengths of companies that help them succeed. When you look at those strengths, it will help us in general across the board in building organizations that are prepared for the post-pandemic America, that are more nimble, that are more resilient, that are more capable of having significant impacts on the people we serve. Then some questions and discussions with Eric and I, and then we'll open it up to questions that you can place into your chat box at any point. First off, why do failures occur? I did some research on this and I found it very, very humorous. Most of the companies in the commercial realm who are in the process of assisting businesses develop strategic plans have massive articles about why they fail, as if they're looking at their own material and trying to figure it out on their own. Strategos, which is one of the better, lists these 7 items. And of course, they don't list incompetent consulting. They list incompetent management as their first issue. Is the management team really good enough or strong enough for a strategy that's as big as we would make it in this day and age. The second is, how clear is the vision? And I think this has a lot to do with communication issues. Vague strategic vision is something that we all start with, and we really need to stop and be different. We shouldn't be asking, should or should we not merge with someone? We should be asking what our company should look like in 5 years and who should we merge with to make that vision occur. Developing that slightly different approach, I think, really begins to give us some grounding that can then be applied to the project plans we need to make things work. An inadequate strategy, again, the idea that we're recycling annual plans and continuous improvement efforts rather than setting back and thinking large and moving in new directions. Lacking an implementation plan. One of the things that I know that has happened here at Open Minds is we've redone our organizational structure and ways of, and our pilot project plan for strategy is to spend a lot more time talking about KPIs, deadlines, timeframes. What does the project look like that makes this vision a success? A significant amount of time is now being dedicated in our model process to making that work. And I think that addresses at least some of this concern. Planning and control becomes big. An implementation plan does not work on its own, and frankly, talent skills around project management are not something we're good at. Back in the days when I was working at Pittsburgh Mercy, we even brought in some outside trainers to teach project management rather than let our key leaders move on without that skill, because frankly, I was terrible at it. I didn't have that training and skill set, and I was interested enough in admitting it. Frankly, we found board members with large corporations in the area who were more than willing to share some of their project planning staff with us and move our key leaders through that training. But I think the idea that project planning is a skill set, it is a content area that you need to have moving into this new world is very, very important for us to admit and accept moving forward. Neglect of political interest is one that has played out for me on multiple occasions. I'm guilty as sin in this regard. Keeping one foot firmly planted with your present payers, your present bureaucracies, explaining to them how what you're intending to do improves the quality of the service you provide becomes a key. So when you look at this grouping so far, what you begin to see is that communication gets repeated over and over again. That there are communication problems either among management or vision, or the implementation plan, or neglecting political interest becomes a key issue in why Strategos thinks that the strategies that we've adopted fail. Finally, a culture of fear. And I think that we are probably just stereotypically and generically more subject to this than industry as a whole. We come from a background that was semi-governmental, and we raised people in an atmosphere where governmental bureaucracy is kind of our model and our role model for leadership development. When you look at that, the worst thing that could happen would be to try something and have a large failure. Bureaucracies and governments don't want the negative headlines. They're much more content with status quo than with moving ahead. And leadership often creates atmospheres in this regard of micromanagement, and people become frightened of sharing ideas or challenging leadership with new ideas or different approaches, or being honest with them in that regard. Again, a major communications hurdle. But in regard to Strategos, this is the model that they've laid out, why there won't work. McKinsey looks at it in a very different way. They look at it as a path. And they said there are three key points in a strategy path where you've got to be paying attention. The first is the failure to launch. You got the plan and you're now moving out. Employee resistance is not addressed. Leadership is disorganized or is delivering mixed messages about the plan or the strategy or the project that they have in place. There's a lack of accountability about who's responsible to make what occur. And that's felt in resistance between managers from one area who seem to be in charge of a project versus supervisors in another who are afraid to move on it because they're not sure of the authority of people. So having that clarity at the beginning is often a problem in the failure to launch failures of strategy. Failure to sustain becomes an issue for projects that have gotten off the ground but don't really reach the height that they should. You can't convince people at the grassroots to change their behavior. There is no real local change agent at the grassroots. The supervisors aren't champions for what are happening. I have a wonderful hospital that I work with here and that I am a patient at here in Morgantown. And I remember years ago when they adopted their patient record, the first week I went into the registration was just wonderful with all the new capabilities and processes they had. But the second time I went in 6 months later, those electronic capabilities were being duplicated by paper records being done and handed out much the same way that they were prior to this process. So if we can't get that frontline person to change behavior, then the project simply won't sustain itself and you're not going to see things move in that flow. Finally, failure to scale. We've done a project, we've done a pilot, it's been successful, but now we are running into an organization that has all sorts of competing needs and urgencies. Finances is now a concern that we have to address. There's a new project, RFP, that we've won that the state or the county is expecting us to deliver. There isn't a blueprint that spreads this out and scales it correctly. We can't bring in the new talent and resources fast enough to make this work. So the strategy may have worked in one location or one place, but we can't push it forward. So in that flow pattern, what I see McKinsey saying is that it starts with communication and clarity of leadership. That leadership has to be focused then on bringing actual change of habit and change of process to frontline staff, convincing them there is a what's in it for me, and finally leading to the final step of having a plan in place after the success to move this project site to site, location to location, until we are completely in process. Deloitte is probably the most damning when it looks at why strategies fail, because they look just simply at a series of tensions, and we say that these tension battles are lost. The elements are incoherence, incongruence, and inconsistency. Failure to develop a common vision and language, failure to implement or plan a vision out correctly, or failure to be consistent and to stay on that path, to be distracted, to suddenly leave your project to follow the next butterfly in the path. Academically, this is what the major consulting firms in industry are saying to the Fortune 500 and the Fortune 2000 about why their strategies didn't attain the success that they should have attained. The real question is, how does this play in for us? To the elements that I see there, I've had an opportunity to share some emails with Monica over this, and I think we're on the process of adding a couple. One is the failure to correctly budget or to show things appropriately and prioritize them correctly in a long-term 2 or 3 year budget. And the second is the failure to be innovative enough to motivate people. Eric, you've luckily been involved with a series of organizations and have been, in my mind, very, very successful at all of them at creating what were real landmark changes in the way they did business and the way they were perceived in the community. How did you motivate and communicate with staff in ways that were different than what we're seeing here?
Sure. Thanks, Ray, and thanks everyone for having me. And thank you for depressing us all with all the failures that you can.
Yes, we have medicines for that, so yeah.
First, I'd like to say I saw the list of attendees here, and I know you're all over the country. And so, for your understanding of me, I am based in Pennsylvania and have worked throughout Pennsylvania, but have no experience in other states. So I'm only speaking from the perspective of what I've seen in Pennsylvania over the last 30 years. And the other thing is that I am currently a CEO and have been for 3 different organizations over the last 8 years. But prior to that, I've worked in all levels, all the way to direct care. So I've seen strategy and process from all the different angles that it can come from. And as a stakeholder, and in some cases, I've been deeply involved, and in others, I've been on the peripheral. But Ray, a couple points that you made that really resonated with me, and you said it twice. You talked about how we're in systems that are quasi-governmental and that also have a political tone to them. And I've seen that throughout. Anytime I've worked for an organization, whether it be at the head of the organization or somewhere in the middle, the influence that our funders, our payers, our governmental bodies, our regulators, how they've approached strategy and how a provider would then react to what their issues were. And there was a period of time where I had some older folks than me that were kind of mentoring me along that would say, don't get too excited about what you're hearing from wherever it was. Harrisburg, which is our state capital in Pennsylvania, Allegheny County, which is a large county and that encompasses Pittsburgh. These folks were giving out ideas and thoughts on what they wanted providers to do. And some providers would purposefully just sit back and not do it because they knew that eventually this would fade away. And why put the energy and the effort into something that wasn't going to get legs? So, we're kind of coming from a bit of a dysfunctional environment, right? New political leaders come, their agendas change, ours changes with it. But where I've seen the best success is when it is something that really focuses on the mission of the organization and the core beliefs. It may be a completely different service line or a different way of doing things, but it kind of comes back to it's not drifting away from the core tenets of the organization, and then you can get a lot of buy-in from all levels. Some failures that I've had over the years, we're getting ahead of things too quickly. You get punished for innovation sometimes in our systems. And if you don't, I like to follow the ask permission, don't ask permission, beg for forgiveness. Well, I've been burned on that a few times. And I've luckily had good leaders ahead in front of me that at that time said, don't worry, I'm not going to fire you, but you need to stay in your lane here and make sure we don't do anything crazy that's going to jeopardize our relationships or contracts. I won't go into details. We don't have a lot of time for that, but just to say what I'm experiencing now, and I'm 9 months into my position here at Step by Step. It's a great organization, and we are in the process of determining strategy and a new strategic plan. And if I could give any piece of advice that I'm learning here, is to really get a pulse for the culture and the environment you're working in. And even if you've been with the organization for a long time that you're running or that you're a part of, you always want to do that pulse check. And when I got here, I realized I wanted to get into what Ray was talking about right away. I wanted to get into business analytics. I wanted to do a balanced scorecard type strategic planning process where we were really looking at KPIs and financial progress as well as operational excellence. And in taking the pulse and going around and meeting with people from all levels of the organization, it became very clear that the culture is a great one, but it's not, I didn't believe, ready for that next level. And the executive team agreed with that. Some of the outgoing retiring execs as well as the new execs coming in, we kind of got together and said, well, we need to slow down here a little bit and go to, if we're going to make this work and get buy-in from all levels, we need to start with a different approach than just coming in and saying we're going to, every problem requires a hammer. So we're doing a Frankenstein's monster, if you will, on strategy right now. We're trying to marry up two completely different strategies. So the front end, we're looking at a process called appreciative inquiry, where we're looking at positives. What has this organization that has been around since 1977, has it done well and continues to do well? And we want to respect and validate the folks that have worked here for years, and we have many long tenured staff here, and hold up and identify, here's the things we do well. And we've gotten through that process with a consultant, and we have a plan of where we want to go. But then we ended that relationship with that consultant. We're bringing in a new group of consultants that are going to put the back end of the monster together. I call it the Frankenstein's monster, where we're going to be focusing on the balanced scorecard approach. How do we hold each other accountable? How do we lift each other up? How do we don't just take this plan and say, well, that's nice, we're going to put it in the file and we'll look at it once a quarter and see if we got to where we wanted to be. No, we're going to have dashboards, we're going to have KPIs, we're going to be really laser focused on improvements in the areas and the strategies that we've developed to implement for the next 2, 3, 4 years of our operation. So Ray, I don't know if I answered the question. I don't know if I was able to offer any.
Well, one of the things that impressed me about your discussions with the strategy were the differences in language. I mean, recognizing the fact that front-end leadership doesn't speak the tones as the CFO or the CEO, I think is important, and building a plan that motivates and communicates them. And maybe that's through stories and appreciative thought, or maybe it's through other methods. But again, back to that theme of communication.
In communication, and we all know this. There's when I looked at the list of people attending this today, you're all from different parts of the country. You're all in different roles, but we all have, I think I can safely say, we all have the same core issue. It's communication. How do you communicate effectively? When you're running community-based services, we're located in over 13 counties in Pennsylvania. I just came from Pittsburgh yesterday. It was a 5-hour drive from Pittsburgh to Wilkes-Barre, where our offices are. We have offices in Philadelphia. We're in all over, and we have over 1,300 employees. And how do we communicate when 80% of them don't have an email address? Because they're community-based, and they're either working in one of our satellite facilities or in schools, or and they're not looking at the email. How do you communicate? And what we're doing, just FYI for everybody, is we're partnering with an organization that has built an app for us. And one of the things that when cell phones first came about, depending on the space you were working in, they were a problem at work, right? Because everybody had their nose into the phone, and you wanted to have them to have their nose with the person they were working with and supporting. We're trying to turn that table now and say, okay, we're going to have your phone. You're going to be able to download an app for free. Everybody has one. And we're going to push information to you in real time. And we're in the pilot phase of that right now. We're really excited about it. We think it's going to change the way we do business. So that's going to work hopefully for us. We'll see. But you got to be thinking about how you're going to communicate, not just strategy, but just everything. Open enrollment when it happens. A lot of us have gone to electronic time and attendance, and now we're not doing payroll stuffers anymore because we're not sending out, a payroll check stubs. So I think communication is critical, right?
I agree, and I started my life a million years ago in this industry as working for Hospital Corporation of America, and it's shocking to me how easy hospital execs have it. 85%, 90% of their workforce wanders through the lunchroom in a 2-hour period every day. If you want to talk to people or communicate, you can do so in a fashion that is the most efficient possible. For us, my goodness, how many locations and sites do we have? How many shifts do we have at those sites? Making sure everyone hears the message. And as we've been told, they have to hear the message multiple times. Making sure that it comes through in an effective way is frankly pretty darn difficult and very demanding in terms of time. As I look on the failures and positives from my time as an executive, and I think about what I might have done differently, I think that frankly, I would have delegated more and spent more of my time, a majority of my time, in actual moving between sites and communicating. And that was not something that really struck me until I began to look back at the situation.
Yeah.
To your point,
Yeah,
Eric, about depressing, we're going to move out of that. I'm taking off my black robe with the big black hood. I'm laying aside the sigh, because the truth of the matter is we all survived. We got our organizations through what we hope is the worst of this, and we are ready to move forward. So I spent a little bit of time not talking about failures and all of the possibilities that can go wrong, but about finding what are the criteria and factors that people say build resilient organizations, that we ought to be encouraging on a day-to-day basis, just so that we would be more ready for the strategy to come. Well, let me walk through just a couple slides on that, and then again, Eric and I will kind of debate what the implications are for that and how we would promote that going forward. One, I'm going to dedicate both of these slides to Harvard Business Review. It's one of my favorite sources for very readable, very usable material that has an impact. And they talk about there being 4 key building blocks to organizations, the 4 organizational DNA elements that make an organization nimble, resilient, capable of moving forward. And it starts with decision rights, which frankly is an interesting place for me because of this semi-governmental process that we talked about. Who can decide on details, and do they understand that they can make that decision, and do they feel based enough in the strategy of the company and understanding enough in the values of the company to make that decision? Are we really creating supervisors who feel like they can affect the company in their own right? And frankly, in this day and age of recruiting problems and difficulties, I worry about where we'll be 3 or 4 years down the road, 5 and 10 years down the road, if we aren't training young leaders to step forward and keeping them and retaining them in the system. So I resonate with that. We need to be finding ways to guide and coach supervisors in decision making, but allow them to make their own mistakes and feel supported in that process. Secondly, information, how it's conveyed and coordinated, performance metrics and transparency, sharing to other units and in other markets. One of the key elements that Monica pointed to when she began work on some element of a presentation that would talk about these themes is data-based management. We need dashboards that are graphic, colorful, and that can be posted in every site so people know when we're improving, when we're not improving, and maybe a sentence or two at the bottom about what will happen as that moves forward. Creating those dashboards are not terribly difficult work, but getting people to buy into the idea that it isn't just longevity, and supervision is more than being the best counselor. It's a process that you will be measured in criteria that matter, and we'll be looking at sharing those criteria and being transparent about it across the board. People in residential need to know how outpatient is performing and vice versa. Making everyone feel part of the same company creates new ways of sharing, new possibilities for dialogue, greater career paths in that process. We again have been looking for several years at the motivators. The motivators are status change, career ladders, succession planning, specialized training for leaders and for key people in the labor force, incentives and rewards. And I'm a big fan of incentives, rewards, but only on a team basis. Let the team succeed, and we can share some reward process. Individualized incentives tend to create hyperactive performers, but don't necessarily improve the entire process of the organization or the unit that they play in. So incentivizing a unit to act as a team, to encourage each other and to train each other on things that work does make sense in the process of building that flow. And finally, structure. Is the way we're put together clearly defined? Do we know outside of the traditional organizational structure system who's in charge of what? What new project is out there? Who's the chairman of the committee doing that? What authority does that person have in changing flows and developing talent within his committees? These kind of things need to be more known and understand. This in Harvard Business Review's process is a 2008 version of organizational DNA. Decentralized decision-making, highly transparent performance metrics done in graphic and colorful formats, motivators for the team and getting a job done, and a structure about committee leadership and organizational flow that makes sense. And basically having committees that are empowered to do work. The first thing we should not be saying about a committee is it meets the first Thursday. We should be talking about what the plan of that committee is and what they're doing exciting to improve the company. This 2008 article was kind of reinforced by a 2021 article that just came out. And I really wanted to bring it up. And a grouping of McKinsey folks had produced this article by looking at organizational readiness. Are you ready for change? And they found 3 areas that they thought really denoted that. One is, does the organization feel the necessity? And they asked questions of the organization and took polls around ideas of purpose, ideas of the direction of the country into the future, the sense of connection between the organizational goals and the goals of the individual. And frankly, I looked at that and I thought flat out, that's mission. That's us reaffirming in the language of our staff the mission of this company as it moves forward and the new mission that we can create. The second grouping was acceleration of change. Are you ready if a change starts and takes off to deal with it? And that dealt with capacity and choreography. Do you have a plan with specific dates? Are those dates meetable, particularly in our environment when so many administrators and managers are frankly handling so many jobs and wearing so many hats presently? Does capacity exist in the budget to handle a small problem or incident and keep moving? Do we have the capability, if we were to build a pilot project of a small grouping of staff, to scale that project outward? Would we have leadership from that small pilot at the supervisor or grassroots level that could go to the next site and talk to them in excited fashion about what it meant and how it should move forward? And finally, they talked about organizing change in the long haul and how to make it sustainable, long-term development activities, some flexibility in motion and action. And this survey that this group built basically said that if you did better than average in these three categories, that you would probably be ready, more ready to accept change and more likely to have your changes be successful. I've renamed them, and to me, it's mission, growth, and sustainability. It's the language we speak, and I think it comes back to not speaking it enough, not conveying in a language that our staff understand why it is we're doing what we need to do. So that's my big insight for the day and my positive step going forward. Eric, what are you feeling about that? Did I hit that?
You did, Ray. You did a great job with it. If the last slide prior to this one was, and I love both of them, but if you go back to the biggest thing I want to focus on here is decision rights, because it is something I'm dealing with currently, and so it's really on my mind. We want to flatten our organization and give people the ability to make decisions, and not just call you a manager or a leader or a supervisor, but treat you that way and give you that respect and dignity to be able to handle those things. I say to people all the time, and we're in a staffing crisis, okay, in the human services. We know that. But I would ask all of you that are listening today, when weren't we, right? I've been doing this 30 years, and we've always been in some level of a staffing crisis. Now, this time it feels a little different, right? It feels a little different. And we're seeing it everywhere across the country in all sectors, and not just the human services. But I'm not trying to diminish our director level or up people, because they're absolutely critical and valuable as leaders for our organization. But I say to people, and sometimes it goes over well and sometimes it doesn't, I guess it depends on the group. We don't have a staffing crisis from the manager level, or I'm sorry, from the director level up. We have it from the manager level down. When we look at our data, we see that those are the areas that we have a really tough time filling. If I lose my job today, or I win the lottery and I go away, there'll be 75, 100 people lined up for my job. My COO's position, the head of the vice president of human resources, all the way down to the directors. They're a little bit harder to fill, but you can fill those jobs. And we call people supervisors, managers, but we really don't treat them that way. And it's a historical thing, right? It's a cultural thing. We want to control it, and we're trying to flatten it out here. And it's coming with, they say that when you try to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. So we're in the egg breaking stage right now. We're trying to empower people so that they understand that they have decision rights. So I love that when I read decision rights. I'm actually going to use that, right? Thank you for that slide. But it's really all about giving people that power to affect change on the level that they can affect it. And it goes right into that information piece too. Because if you give them good, solid data and not conjecture, and trust them to make the decisions, they're going to 9 times out of 10 make the right decision. And if they don't, then that's where you build your leadership ladders to support them in coming up with the right decision and talking through it. So I love the 4 building blocks of organizational DNA. I think it's great. And we all struggle with it, and every organization is different. And but at the end of the day, if you're all driving towards the same goal, if you ask me right now, Eric, I'll give you $1 million if you can tell me step-by-step mission. And I've been here 9 months. I could get probably 95% of it correct, the actual mission statement. But I was asked by a couple staff the other day, direct care staff. I've been every month I go around to our different regions and I spend a day with open doors where they can come in and talk to me about anything they want. And two of them have both been here over 20 years. They said, "What is your mission?" And I had to think about it. I almost said the step-by-step mission. And instead I said, "I want people to be happy, healthy, and safe. I want the people we support and our employees to be happy, healthy, and safe." And you know, to me, that is really what it's all about. And we build from there. And that worked for them. They got it. They smiled. They shook their heads in an affirmative way, and we went on with the next discussion. But all these building blocks of organizational DNA, it goes back to what I said earlier, taking that culture check, that pulse check of what's going on out there, get out of the office. And we've been buried in our offices for over a year now. And so I've taken advantage of the last couple of months. Now it looks like it's getting bad again, depending on where you are. And we're back to masking and things of that nature here in the buildings. But I've been trying to get out as much as possible and just talking to folks and learning from them.
You know, Eric, one of I'm glad you pointed back here, because I was thinking as you talked, I'm wondering if our leadership really knows what their key job is. And maybe micromanagement is about them just being comfortable with decisions at lower levels. One of I had a great right-hand man at Pittsburgh Mercy when I was there, and he really assisted in job description changes. What we did at that point was we looked at the directors and said, your primary goal is financial accountability. The finance director will work with you to train you on what an income statement looks like, what a budget looks like, and you will work with your managers and supervisors to find areas of problem and to address it. But stay out of other areas because you're going to be evaluated on finances. And we went to the managers across the board, regardless of location, and said, you're change leaders and quality leaders. You are going to learn the data that we use to measure our effectiveness and how to bring about change and manage a small project. And those are going to be your heavy lifts. And we want you to respond when the director says something's wrong with finance, but we don't want you to assume that that is your sole goal. You are about change and quality. And the frontline supervisors were about experience of care, employee satisfaction, and management of the hiring and firing process. And once everyone kind of knew their area, and we had experience of care on the front lines, they not only knew what they needed to do, but they also knew what they needed to learn to get to the next step up. So that I think was a positive change from that. For example, if you had good decision rights and you had good information, and so the third day or fourth day of the month, the reports came out and they showed a problem in a certain site, that supervisor, if they were motivated and felt they had decision rights, would have the information, would probably have an idea about something new they would try already being tested by the time you got to the place of talking to them about it. And that's the kind of nimbleness that I think we need going forward. And I think that we have a lot of young leaders in the company who are ready for this. And we just need to begin to communicate it, be serious about it, and kind of move forward.
Yeah, I agree. We've got to turn it over. We've got to let go of that control as executive leaders. Not that we don't want to keep our eyes, inspect what you expect, right? And me going around to our regions, it's developed over time, the process. And one of the things that I try to articulate to the leadership of those regions is this isn't to say that you're doing anything wrong, that the CEO needs to come out, because they get uncomfortable, right? I mean, I'm sitting there and anybody can come in and talk to me. It doesn't matter who you are, somebody we support, our staff, whatever, and it's uncomfortable. I get it. I used to be, a middle level leader, and that's uncomfortable. And I tell people, look, I'm not here to get into your business on how you operate day to day. Now, staff may come to me and complain about their schedule, right? And I'm going to listen to them. And it's not that I'm not compassionate with that and sympathetic to their plight. But what I do is I go back to whoever their director or their vice president, whoever, and I say, look, it's not, to me, they're not talking to me about the schedule. They are, but what I'm hearing is that there's a communication problem. Back to the C word, right? Communication. If your staff are so frustrated that they feel like they have to make time out of their day to come see the CEO when he's in town to talk about their schedule, that means that they're not getting what they need from you. So I'm not there to try to figure out, okay, you want to work Monday through Thursday, 4/10s, and nobody's listening to you. I'm not drilling down. I'm not getting into that minutia. But what I'm saying to the leadership of that region is, look, you want to have a dialogue with your folks. We have a staffing crisis, and every staff that gets frustrated or upset because they don't feel like they're being heard or listened to, or maybe they feel that they're not being able to do the decision rights that they want to do on their level and what their job description says because we want to micromanage over here. These things need to be talked about because we can't afford to continue to lose staff because we're just doing it the way we've always done it. And you will turn this paperwork in, even if it means you have to drive across town and the people you support are suffering for it. But that's the way we've always done it, right? We always hear that saying. The worst thing in business is we've always done it. So times are changing, our staff are changing, and we just need to accept that and see how we work through it.
Well, Sam, do we have any questions from the group? I think we've reached a point here where we're all kind of aligned with respect to the issues we've had. What does the group think?
Yeah, we've got a couple questions here coming in. First is with regard to Delta coming on the rise and COVID on the rise again. They have a question with regards to strategy in terms of they have employees who are providing in-home services and are concerned about their safety going into homes. And then there's another one just about general strategy with Delta if you want to go wider.
Eric, why don't you give a first crack at that? You're presently involved in leadership.
Sure.
I'm a bit segregated from.
Yeah, we have a pretty large in-home and community service line of business, and it's an issue. It really is, and we've worked very hard on all levels here to keep people happy, healthy, and safe. And we're now with the Delta variant and future variants, from what I understand, we really worked hard, and our currently our former COO who relocated did a great job of putting us in a position to track and to report back and be transparent throughout the whole COVID crisis on where we sat, where our positivity rates were for our regions, all the way down to our individual locations. And sometimes we made decisions on a case-by-case basis. The last couple months, we kind of paused that. We still met, but we weren't putting out the kind of details. We did get very specific on a campaign for vaccination here at Step by Step. We called it the Step Up campaign. And we were happy to see that we're almost at 70, well, I don't want to say happy, that's probably not a good word, but we were at about 70% of our employees, over 90% of our people we support have been vaccinated. So to answer your specific question about Delta, we have not gotten any feedback as we have gotten back into home and community supports from staff that I'm aware of yet regarding their safety. But how we would approach that is case by case. If the individual or the family they're working with is vaccinated, and if the staff is vaccinated, we would go to CDC guidelines then, and we'd be looking at masking and social distancing and all those good things. If at any point anyone doesn't feel safe in that interaction, then we will pause that interaction and we'll go back to Zoom or more remote ways of trying to keep connection and keep people active. Hopefully that answered their question.
Yeah, I thought there were a couple elements in there that resonated with the slides, particularly your idea about being transparent about the information, knowing what your percentages were without sharing HIPAA information, but looking at positivity rates and areas of problem and being honest about it with staff. I know that staff does not expect us to have all the answers because they simply don't exist, and they know that we can't keep them safe any more than they can keep themselves safe to the 100% level. But they need to be communicated in a way that lets them understand that we care, that we are worried about their safety, and we're trying to come up with ideas. We're not approaching this from the point of view of, yes, there's a standardized plan, but that standardized plan is the best across the board. We can approach this on an individual basis if we need it to feel more comfortable. Maybe the best we can do is just convey that sense of a dignity and respect for staff as we move forward. And that using the best criteria that are given us, and trying to do, as you were pointing out, sharing information and being flexible at the local level when you need to.
Yeah, and I mean, what we did here is in the early stages of vaccinations, as I'm sure everyone on this call knows, it was very difficult to get things scheduled. Here in Pennsylvania, you were on different levels of ability to get vaccinated based on your job or your health condition. So we really focused on getting the vaccination readily available to our people we support and the staff. And so we try to make it as simple and easy as possible for them to come to a vaccine clinic and get that done. We didn't leave them to their own devices to do it. And then once we got through that and things started to loosen up and vaccines were becoming more available, we realized there were a lot of vaccine hesitant folks out there. So instead of trying to hit them with a hammer and say, you got to do this, and believe me, we talked, in closed doors about all levels of how do we get this number up. And what we all came up with was that dignity and respect, respecting people's beliefs and their culture, whatever their issues may be, and educate, and then say, if you want any information, we're here to give it to you. If you want to know where you can go get a vaccine, we will make it possible for you to get that done. And it's worked. I mean, for the most part. But you're right, Ray. It's really an individual decision until and if the government says it's not, and then we'll obviously all of us on this call will have to go back to our teams and say, okay, what's the next move here? But it changes daily, right? And it's going to start changing again.
Sam, do you have a second we can do quickly?
Yep, we have time for one more quick response. This kind of hits on some of the points we made earlier, and but their question was communication and communicating strategy is even more challenging now with staff working hybrid, in-person, and remote models, kind of getting back to what you were saying earlier, multiple locations, et cetera. What are some general thoughts you have on strategizing that?
The importance of a communication plan. This is the wonky thing from the old Excel guide that I'll just share with you, is building a spreadsheet where column A is the message you want delivered, column B is the person that has to deliver it, column C is how they're going to deliver it, and column D is the date they're going to deliver it. So if you, and just check boxing that every time you hit it, so that your board members have messages that they intend, that they need to deliver, and that they know what those memes are, the critical phrases that you want repeated over and over again. But managing.
If I can jump in, I know we're almost out of time, but not to cut you off, but I do want to share something about communication. and so my graduate work was done in the School of Communications. It was around strategic communication planning. And one of the things we were taught is, and I think it's important for this group to hear when you talk about strategy and strategic planning, don't forget that there is a companion piece to that that's so critical that people forget about, is the communication piece. There is a whole way of writing strategic communication plans around your strategic plan and how you're going to communicate it out, how you're going to stay transparent, how you're going to give people information on a consistent basis that keeps that plan flowing through the pipeline. And I think a lot of people forget about that. They do a strategic plan and they think, okay, it's good, it's great. But even if you have a large, like we had 40 people, close to 40 people as part of our planning team for our plan, but that's only a small fraction of our overall organization. So we can't assume just because these 40 people know the plan inside and out that the other, 1,200 that they don't. So a strategic communication plan, you have my email address if you want more information on it, but if you Google strategic communication plan, you'll learn a ton of stuff about it. And it's critical to success, I believe.
Well, thank you, Eric. Until we have an opportunity and the world changes a little bit and you and I can meet at Max's Allegheny Tavern on the north side in Pittsburgh, we'll just have to call it at that. I want to thank everyone for attending, and Sam, I'll hand it back to you.
Sure. Thanks, Ray. If you could go, I think there's a couple slides at the end. I have a couple brief announcements. One more, please. Okay, so yep, please consider joining us next week. We're going to have Emily Corns and John Seymour, and they're going to be talking about virtual marketing strategy.
They're much more attractive than Ray and I. I would join that call before I join ours ever again.
And then Ray, one more slide, another plug. Please consider joining us at the end of the month in sunny Newport Beach, California for our Management Best Practice Institute. We're going to have all of these speakers and more. It's going to be a great place to learn and network and enjoy California. You can sign up at management.openminds.com. And then final announcement, thanks again to our sponsor, Qualifax Incredible, for making today's session free. Thank you, Ray and Eric, for your time and effort. And thanks to everybody for joining us. And we hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.